From sea to shining sea, all over the country and across the world, this is Coast to Coast AM. My name is Rob Simone, filling in for George Norrie tonight. And what can I say? I have been waiting for the show for the past week because this is an opportunity to showcase what Coast to Coast does best. Tonight we're going to be talking with Thomas Fusco, who has a theory, a scientifically provable theory about the nature, the science of the unexplained, of the paranormal. And I've spoken with him at length a few months ago, and I was really impressed. It stuck with me. As someone who has been a researcher in all kinds of phenomena, been around the world, this really, really stuck with me. So we're going to talk about how is it that his scientific theory can be applied to get this poltergeist phenomenon, orbs, ghosts, hauntings, even stuff of biblical proportion. And you're going to see how it all fits together. Very interesting fellow. His book is called Behind the Cosmic Veil, and you're going to take your turn asking him questions. And, of course, open lines later in the show. So I want to hear about your experiences, because this one really is a good show to get involved with if you have something that you can share related to your own personal experience. Because I think what's great about Coast is a lot of people call in, they say what happened and what's going on. But this is somebody who's sort of, has come along for about 20 years and says, well, I've got a theory. I think a piece of the puzzle here. And for me, it really is something that I had to think twice about. I think, this guy actually has something. And the fact that it's based on a very understandable scientific principle, I think you're going to be really impressed. Now, that's coming right up. But first, a quick update. Since the last show I did about chemtrails, I have got hundreds and hundreds of emails, and not just from great people listening in this country and Coast listeners, but people in other countries, Australia and England and Europe. And they really were electrified by this, because what they found was that, there is a phenomenon that's going on and has been going on for 10 years. I know. I've been literally around the world seeing it in different countries since the early 2000s. And when we brought in Clifford Carnicom and talked about it, we talked about some of the Morgellons and some of the other aspects. I think people really said, this is something I really just can't turn away from anymore. And I was getting reports from all over. In fact, the funny thing was that people said, the chemtrails stopped a day or two after the show, and then they started back up again. And I have to say, here in Los Angeles, where I'm doing the show from now, is the same way. We've just been getting inundated. And I have people telling me, email me all the time about this phenomenon. It literally has not stopped. So I just want everyone to know that that's something that I was really blown away about the response that came through, and I'm still working on that. And, well, in the news, what can I say? North Korea tried to light up a Roman candle. They were trying to show off, and it went boom in their face. Now, I think, talking to some insiders that I know, that this was sort of an inside job. This was the one time where this black military-industrial complex actually did what it was supposed to do, from what I am hearing. And it took the form of some sort of X-ray laser, some sort of directed energy weapon from a satellite. And, if that is the case, if this was shot down by one of our clandestine satellites orbiting, which they have, all the power in the world to do, then I would say, all right, that's a step in the right direction. And not just because it got that missile down and because it threw the egg on the face of that horrible dictatorship, but because what they normally would do is let that thing go and let it, hit its target, so that we could have this endless excuse for military operations and arms sales and to go in and have things escalate. Because that's where it seems like the power center is brokered in this tiny little world of ours. So the fact that this thing came down on its own, or if it was assisted, I say, that's kind of a step in the right direction. Because instead of trying to push this thing toward the inevitable sale of more weapons and systems that shoot down weapons, maybe they're doing something right for the first time. And so I have to say that that's something I'm still trying to get some information on. If you got anything, let me know. We're going to jump right in to this interview with Thomas Fusco right after this. Welcome back to Coast AM. Rob Simone here filling in for George Norrie. And we have a guest that's going to talk about the science of the paranormal. And he says that there is sort of an understandable intelligence in the universe. And let's face it, if the human mind is a subset of the universe and we're intelligent, well, that means the universe is too. And he has got a line on perhaps a sort of a unified field theory that explains a lot of different phenomenon with the same explanation. You're going to love this. His book is called Behind the Cosmic Veil. Thomas P. Fusco, welcome to Coast AM.
Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Oh, great. Thanks. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Hey, we talked a few months ago, and I was really impressed by how you have come to the subject with a very sort of pragmatic approach. And, let's face it, you've done your due diligence in your theory, so I think this is something that pushes this whole field a little bit further. But you didn't start off as someone that was trained or fascinated by the paranormal. You were basically just a regular guy, but you've had some interesting experiences that when it has to do with sort of precognition.
Yes, that's correct. That was in my teen years and early 20s. I had several such experiences where I had, information available to me that there's no way I should have. Mm-hmm. And it was so detailed that it went beyond anything that would be considered random chance or lucky guess, that type of thing. And being a very pragmatic and scientifically minded guy, these experiences caused me to question what I was taught about science and how the universe was put together. And so for me, the pressing question became, what kind of a universe would allow these types of things to happen? And it was to answer that question that started me on my research for several decades.
Yeah, tell me the story about when you were looking at that picture in your girlfriend's house. It's sort of sets the tone.
Well, probably a little premature at that time to call her a girlfriend.
Okay.
She had been she was a freshman in high school. I had met her just the week before.
Okay.
And she had invited me over to her house for lunch. And as I was standing around in her parents' living room looking at different pictures that were on the wall while she was making sandwiches, I came in front of this one painting. And while I was looking at it, I got a severe pain in my left forearm. And it was kind of mysterious. But when she came back in the room, the question that came off the top of my head was just bizarre. And I asked her just matter-of-factly, did the person who painted this picture ever injure their arm? And she just about turned white. If you think about all the different details or points of interest that would have gone into that type of a question, it's not something that anyone could have reasoned. But what she told me was that her brother, her older brother, and I had no idea she had any siblings, was actually an amateur painter. He had been working on this painting several years before, and during the time he was working on it, he was working out in the folks' backfield there with a chainsaw and actually severely injured his left forearm with it. And so that kind of experience makes you wonder how things are put together. And for me, it wasn't a type of a situation where I was fascinated so much with doing such a thing, but with knowing how it could be.
And is it safe to say your mind was just sort of blank and it just sort of popped in while you weren't even thinking?
Pretty much so. It was like an offhand question. Hey, by the way,
yep.
And it really came in my mind like that.
Yeah, well, I know exactly what you mean. It's happened to me. And so is this sort of these experiences sort of what started you off on really, because some people would just put it out of their mind and they would live a normal life. You know, they'd sell insurance and get married, but there's something that really stuck with you.
I was always one of those children that had to know why for everything. And for me, Rob, it was a sincere, it wasn't kind of a game that some kids play. It was a sincere inquiry, sincere curiosity. So that really became the compelling drive that caused me to begin to look into how reality might be put together.
Mm-hmm. So take us into this book now. How did you start off really compiling this in a very clear, pragmatic theorem?
Well, the first thing that I took into consideration was that supernatural and paranormal phenomena, to me, was a very important body of evidence that for us to really understand how the universe is put together and how it works, we need to have some sort of a handle on what these things are and why they do what they do. The second part of it was to take that kind of information, that kind of evidence, that body of evidence, and try to give it a scientifically reasonable definition. So normally, as you know, traditionally paranormal and supernatural is kind of a catch-all basket. Anything that's odd or weird or unusual, people dump it in there. But that's not good enough to try to reckon soundly with. So for me, when I really thought about it, I found that all the things that these events shared in common was that they were physical observations that actually had physical effects that interacted with their immediate physical surroundings, but had no direct physical cause directly connected locally to the event. And so to me, that's what distinguishes what is supernatural or paranormal. Physicists, as we know, have a name for this. They call it non-local causality, or non-locality for short, where we have an effect with no direct connected local physical cause. And then once I was able to establish that and be convinced that, yes, this is an absolute quality that is in common with all these phenomena, and that science also recognizes this kind of effect, then the pegs began to fall and things began to start connecting from one field to the next, and a coherent picture began to emerge for me.
Well, let's jump into physics a little bit here. The Einstein, Podolsky-Rosen paradox. You talk about Bell's theorem and how things can communicate seemingly faster than light. And there are these, things that are out there in physics that are at least halfway accepted. Is this something that you feel lies at the center of explaining a lot of these different paranormal phenomenon?
Well, what non-local causality indicates to me is that two things. Primarily, that there is what I call a supergeometric, a superphysical overlay on top of physical reality. And of course, we define physical reality as the realm of space and time, matter and energy, that is confined by the three spatial dimensions and the one dimension of time, which Einstein gathered together for us in a single concept called space-time. But what we run into in these kinds of events, and also in the cutting edge of physics today, is that we have simply run out of explanations that we can find within these four dimensions to explain all the observations that we have. And so for me, it was natural to conclude that there is something that is superdimensional or extra-dimensional that would actually be the cause behind these kinds of what we would call non-local events, where we see the observation, but we don't see the cause. And so that's a very important element to how I believe the universe is made.
Okay. Well, let's take one, for example. Let's take ghosts. Now, this is something that I think people are going to be surprised about. The phenomenon of ghosts and ghost hunting, which includes sounds and cold spots. How does your theory then come into play for this particular scenario?
Well, here's one of the keys to beginning to understand all of this. It's a matter of taking a look at things from a different paradigm. And so, for example, one of the instances that I talk about to help people understand that is how people, let's say 3,000 years ago or so, when they looked up at the sky, and what they saw in the night sky was a crystalline or a glass sphere with holes punched into it that a light was shining through, and all the planets were in their own particular spheres. And today we have a much different paradigm. When we look at the night sky, we see in our minds something completely different and with a whole entirely higher level of understanding with that modern paradigm. But the key is that the information that was coming through our eyeballs is the exact same information that was coming through them 3,000 years ago. So when it comes to ghosts and disembodied voices and that type of thing, one of the key perceptions, one of the key paradigms to begin to unravel all this is to realize that what we're looking at is information that is materializing. We know today that the entire universe is made of information, so much so that physics has created an extension to the conservation laws. They don't just say that matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed. They also say now that information can neither be created nor destroyed. So if we have a superphysical source of information, and we have a mechanism by which that information can materialize into physical reality in space and time, then we can not only begin to explain things like disembodied voices and apparitions, but we can also explain the strangeness of quantum physics. And as you know, one of the key mysteries that unlocks all of this is the true nature of gravity.
Okay, tell us how the warping of space-time and gravity then is the conduit to this phenomenon.
Well, to understand that, we need to take a look real quick at how quirky gravity is. Science has tried to fit it into one of the four fundamental forces of nature, and yet what thwarts that is that, unlike the other three, we've never been able to find the particle that propagates as a wave to convey the force. In other words, we've never been able to discover a graviton or a gravity wave. When Einstein tried to solve his unified field equations, he stumbled on gravity. He could not express it mathematically in 4 dimensions. When we try to reconcile his relativity with quantum physics, we stumble on the same thing, gravity. Our standard model of the universe that physicists use as the basis for everything we understand scientifically about the universe has no expression for gravity. So when we start looking at all these things, we come to an understanding that gravity itself is quite a paranormal phenomenon. And so we have places in the universe where we have detected the bending of space, where there is no direct adjacent physical mass to cause it. And to me, that was the key. When we start thinking about different ways to apply the bending of space and what phenomena that bending would create, then the veil lifts, so to speak, and we begin to be able to connect all these different phenomena and why they're occurring.
So you're actually suggesting that there is some sort of subtle bending of time-space, and that acts as a portal?
Absolutely. That's a very good way of looking at it, Rob. When we, everybody's heard of dark matter.
Sure.
What most of the general public isn't aware of because of the air of certitude that scientific authorities present it, the reality of dark matter is there's absolutely not a stitch of evidence for it. It is an imaginary substance. The only reason why there even is a concept of dark matter is because we've discovered there's about 90% more gravitational bending in the universe than there is visible mass to account for it. So science, being a very materialistic philosophy, has made up a materialistic explanation for this bending. But if we remove this for a moment and say, for example, okay, let's say for a moment that there is no such thing as dark matter. What we have then is the bending of space on a large scale in the universe with no direct physical cause, which means it must be coming outside of the physical. Now, when we combine that bending of space with materializing information within those bends, it opens up all kinds of doors to understand many of the mysteries that are facing us today.
Okay, hold it right there. We're going to walk through some of those doors when we come back. My name is Rob Simone. You're listening to Coast AM. We are back. This is Coast AM. And we are going to get right to the heart of the matter tonight, because I know all of you listening out there have had something weird, quirky, weird, strange, and I want to know about it, because what we're going to do to you is give you sort of a little taste of this theory that Thomas is talking about, and see if that doesn't resonate, because it really explained a lot for me, and it really set my mind to thinking. Thomas, right before the break, we were talking about this idea of space, time-space, gravity, bending. So tell us about the possibilities, little pockets appearing and having a multitude of paranormal effects.
Right, Rob. The larger picture, in brief, is that how reality is actually put together is that when we talk about these bendings of space and the associated gravity with them, the standard model has said that mass bends space and creates the effect known as gravity. But the idea that we see so much of this bending of space and gravity without adjacent mass leads us to the conclusion that reality is actually put together in the opposite way. In other words, it is the bending of space from a source outside of space-time that creates a field of gravity, and within that crucible is where matter and mass actually materializes. And that's really crazy in a way, because that gives us a clue, a reasoning of how the universe could have actually been created out of nothing. Now, when we take that broad picture,
okay,
what we should be able to do is take a look at little windows of reality and say, let's take that model and look at this little window and see what it can tell us. For example, with quantum physics, we all know the weirdness and quirkiness that happens on the subatomic level. This model would tell us that we see it in that way because reality is not fully materialized yet. And so it cannot be one distinct thing or another yet. It has to actually fully materialize.
All right.
So that explains to us really in a very general way why quantum physics is so weird. But now let's take a window, what we were talking about earlier, into the paranormal.
Okay.
All right? And let's see what this effect would tell us about paranormal phenomena.
Yeah, say we're, in a haunted house, so to speak, and walk us through it.
Yeah. Now, when we see this gravitational bending in the depths of space, we know that that's pretty much an environment of a vacuum. But when we would see that kind of a thing occur locally here, let's say in a haunted house where we have material, we have substances like atmosphere and molecules.
Sure, air and all that, yeah.
Yeah. We would see some very strange effects. So imagine that we have a bubble of space-time, like a round sphere, that begins to swell and expand from a source outside of space-time that's actually pushing into our realm and expanding one of these bubbles.
Say from a different dimension.
Yeah,
okay.
or like what I would call a super-dimensional type of a realm.
Very good.
Yeah. One of the things that we would see, we know that the bending of space actually crushes and twists and compresses the space at the outside of that ring.
Of the event horizon.
In a sense, yeah, we normally think of space as being empty, but Einstein proved to us it's actually a substance. There's a geometry to it.
It's like a fabric, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we have air molecules that are occupying that space,
Okay.
What happens is that they undergo an actual mechanical stress. And unlike the vacuum in space, what this has air molecules, and of course the molecules have atoms. The atoms have electrons.
Sure.
When you mechanically stress those types of things, electrons will become agitated and they'll jump into their higher orbits. And so the first thing that we would see in this area is an electromagnetic field that would appear to literally come out of thin air. It would just appear out of nowhere.
Aha. Now, that's pretty big right there. Because, as everyone knows, when it comes to strange things in crop circles and everywhere else, there's always this electromagnetic signature that either drains batteries or it's detected by a field detector. So that's interesting. Okay, keep going.
Yes, and the key to it, again, if we stick back to the original paradigm, we have no local, physically connected cause to produce this electromagnetic field.
Okay.
Which is what makes it paranormal.
So the bubble is opening from somewhere, but we're saying, okay, as it's doing it, it's giving off the kinds of things that we associate and have for very long with these paranormal encounters.
Yeah, we've never had a physical model before this that connects all these phenomena. So,
okay. So as the electrons are getting stimulated, excited because of this slight warping, would they give off photons too?
Well, here's the thing. We know what goes up, even on the subatomic level, what goes up must come down. So the electrons are not going to stay in these higher orbits forever. They're going to expend their excitement and drop back down. Now, under certain conditions, we know, this is established science, that we know a couple things that they can do. Electrons, when they drop back down into their lower orbits, they can release photons. And, of course, photons are particles of light. Now, we have something in our modern age that we use all the time that uses the same effect. You pass an electromagnetic field through a physical material, excite the electrons. When the electrons drop back down, they emit photons. That's what we call an LED. That's a light-emitting diode.
Okay.
So that would also give us, on occasion, a luminous phenomenon. The other thing that it can release would be thermal energy. And under certain circumstances, that would occur. Now, we have a lot of paranormal investigators over the last decade or two. They've been increasingly using these thermal imaging cameras. And they've been picking up some very interesting images in these haunted houses, some of them being so detailed that they actually are a thermal apparition. They look like a person standing there.
Uh-huh. And if it's giving off photons, then, and if it is a curved bubble, it would look like a floating orb.
It could very much.
Yeah.
In fact, if the audience has been following what I'm saying mentally, visually in their minds, if you picture a bubble jacketed in with an electromagnetic field and emitting photons, this is the first scientific picture in history for what a luminous orb is.
And what people have been photographing and seeing for decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so take us a little bit further, because now there's the thermal component. I know people say, oh, well, when it gets cold when there's a ghost around.
Well, here's the thing. On the outside of this bubble, and this is one of the things that has confused paranormal investigators, can we get a heat signature and feel cold at the same time? Well, when these electrons drop back down, they get emitted a heat signature. When we look at these paranormal thermal images, we find they don't look like the wide variation of signatures that we would see in a human being or a living creature. We see a more or less uniform heat signature across the entire surface of the apparition, which means, number one, it's the same mechanism that's occurring over the entire surface. And number two, it's actually happening at the outside surface of this bubble,
okay,
which is all consistent with this model.
All right.
But now, again, when we open up a bubble of space-time, in the presence of material like atmosphere, that type of thing, and that atmosphere holds thermal energy, if it happens very slowly, the laws of equilibrium would allow the thermal energy in the material to flow into that vacuum, pretty much like water seeking its own level. But, Rob, if it happened quick enough, it would be like waking up on a cold winter's day, going up to your front door and opening it up very quickly. You would have a differentiation in pressure. You would have an inrushing. And, of course, what this would produce in a haunted house would be, number one, you would get a cold spot, sometimes in the same place where you're recording heat signatures. And the other thing that would happen is the inrushing of air would cause one of these brief mystery breezes that are often reported, where they feel a breeze where all the doors and windows are closed.
Now, how can this bubble that we're saying is being pushed into our reality by unknown forces at the moment, how can it explain, say, EVP, electric voice phenomenon?
Well, here's where the idea of materialized information comes in.
All right.
So let's take, for example, if we can for a moment, let's talk about, one of my favorites, the 19th century Victorian lady apparition.
Okay.
When we understand this as materialized information, when we look at it from that ultra-modern paradigm, we can understand that the lady that lived 150 years ago, everything that comprised her, her body, her clothing, her appearance, her shape, is all materialized information. Now, if that same information came down within a bubble of space-time, in a haunted house of today, for example, that same information would materialize in the same way. The bubble would take the exact form of that materialized information, and we would see an apparition. The information, by the way, would prove the existence of time travel of information because it's traveled from the past into the future. But now when we're talking about EVPs, this is where it gets really, really deep into the rabbit hole. Imagine if there was a vocalization. Let's not talk for a moment about spirits speaking or something like that. Let's talk about a coherent collection of information outside of space-time that was intelligent. It had an intelligence, and it would try to speak into space-time. And a bubble would open, and that vocalized information would begin materializing within that bubble. The outside of that bubble, just like it took the shape of the Victorian lady, it would also take the shape of this materializing vocalization and begin to oscillate. It would vibrate to the frequency and the amplitude of that vocal information. And so what we would have then, Rob, is that we would actually have the face of space itself acting as a speaker. And so what we would actually have, let's say in a disembodied voice, we would actually hear a voice out of thin air, exactly what they hear, because the surface of that materializing bubble is going to agitate the air and compress it in the exact same way as a set of vocal cords does. The other part of that, we talked about earlier about that expanding of space and time, that would create an electromagnetic field. At certain wavelengths, that field would also oscillate to the materializing information. So this electromagnetic field given off by this expanding space would now be oscillating just like something where, like an old record player, where the needle would pick up the vibrations from the groove. Now that electromagnetic field would go to the copper coils of the microphone of the recorder. It would completely bypass the acoustic diaphragm and would impose itself or induce itself upon those coils, and then it would be translated by the electronics into a vocalization that we
So it's like a conduit and like a window.
In a sense.
Yeah. Well, what other phenomenon that's widely discussed or seen can be explained by these, these bubbles that are opening up?
Well, in the paranormal, another phenomena that we observe is at certain times we have a malfunctioning of electrical equipment.
Yeah.
And this has been traditionally said that, a spirit is draining energy in order to manifest. And we know if we look at that from pure physics, the physics just isn't there for it.
Well, I mean, if these things are opening up, I can imagine if it opened up near a server, it might cause some problems. Can this something that can move? So, I mean, UFOs can sort of be explained with this theory too, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I want to ask you about that right after this quick break. We'll be back in 127 seconds. Yeah, this is Coast to Coast AM. We're talking with Thomas P. Fusco. His book is called Behind the Cosmic Veil. And Thomas, I'm trying to get my head around this. Now, it seems like, okay, it's understandable that there's these little bubbles that open up and I don't know, maybe that explains the Loch Ness Monster and other things. How is it, do you think, that these bubbles are opening up? Is this the intelligence of an extra-dimensional being that's doing it, or is this a function of the cosmos, do you think?
Well, according to my model, these bubbles in space-time result in everything that's in the universe, that there is a collection of information that's been called by many names throughout history. Plato's forms, the Greek Bible calls it the Logos. It's been called implicate order. Edgar Cayce called it Akasha. This information materializes within these bubbles of space-time, and it results in everything that we see.
It's like a portal to all kinds of phenomena. And we're talking about bringing things in from any time, information from any place, right?
Yes. For example, there are a number of sensitives in the paranormal field that speak of being able to detect in certain haunted sites spiritual vortexes.
Okay.
Well, a standing bubble of space-time opened up like this, without any materialized information inside of it, would physically represent the exact same characteristics that are attributed to a spirit vortex.
Hmm. Well, are there people, do you think, now living or in history, that were able to manifest something like this happening, to manifest this localized portal from which they could do any number of magical or strange things?
Yeah, this is the great thing about this model, because it starts pulling all these things together. When we look at it from a paradigm of materialized information, everybody in the audience, if you just take a second and look around you, look at the things like your tables, your telephone, your computers. None of these things could occur in nature, even within the confines of random selection, given so many millions of years. We human beings actually materialize information. The phone I'm holding is materialized information. And this is something that we have a quality of that reflects the actual creative process in the greater universe in which our minds are a subset. So it's only a very tiny leap from that point forward to see where the human brain and the human mind could actually directly influence reality and cause information within that brain to materialize in physical reality.
Do you think that another, I don't know, race or another extra-dimensional intelligence could create these portals to enter in to our world, and that's how we see these things, these ships and these UFOs pop into reality and disappear or fly around without any explanation that we can put to with our just rational Western 3D mindset?
Well, this is one of the things that I came to the conclusion. When we just stand back for a moment and take a look at paranormal phenomena in a haunted house, excuse me, and then take a look at the ways these UFOs behave, they do very similar things. It looks like the exact same kind of phenomena once you kind of get the ghost out of the way just for a moment to look at it. And we know it has something to do with gravity. How many people in a haunted house have said that at the onset of an event we have a feeling of heaviness? And according to my model, these expanding bubbles would actually generate this kind of an additional gravitational field. And so their reports of heaviness are literally true. But if we were to understand, this is what I believe, if UFOs are intelligently designed and controlled craft, what they have done is they have cracked this cosmic code of creation that's reflected in hauntings and paranormal phenomena, and have actually been able to build technology based on it.
So this is the universal way of making anything happen, and so to speak. But you say there are probably very few people on this planet who have lived that can do it completely.
Well, yes, I think there's physical limitations. Like in lower animals, they have brains too, and they reason as well, according to the same order. And ours are more advanced, so we have a lot more coherent patterns that we can hold and reason with. But there's a limit to our human ability, just in our flesh and blood brains, to be able to make this happen on a larger scale. We would need technology to make those kinds of things occur on a larger scale, like a spacecraft.
Well, do you think the stories of the Bible are relatable to this type of phenomenon?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the Bible is loaded with miracles, supernatural phenomena. Just take one, for example. We were just talking about the materialization of information in a different location than what it originally started from, like a disembodied voice or more like the apparition. If we take a look at where Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes, doesn't say that he multiplied these into so many hundreds or thousands of loaves. He said that it says that he fed them with all the same 5 loaves and 2 fishes.
Now that is where the rubber meets the road. We're talking with Thomas Fusco. We're going to talk a little bit more when we come back, and your phone calls. And he says this theory is provable. I want to hear about that. You're listening to Coast AM. My name is Rob Simone. Stay tuned. We're coming right back after the break. That's right. It is Coast AM, and it's 2012. This is the year of change. And that doesn't mean things and places, but that all could be change in your mind. And we're talking about a different way to look at the kind of phenomenon that we have written off as ghosts, poltergeists, as Loch Ness monsters, and maybe even religious texts. That's right. We're talking to Thomas P. Fusco. His book is called Behind the Cosmic Veil. And he's giving us a pretty interesting idea that he says is provable that could explain a lot of different phenomena. His website is cosmicveil.com, and it's linked up right now at coasttocoastam.com. We're back on Coast to Coast AM. And Thomas, right before the break, I think you were going to give us a parable about a biblical story that you feel can be explained with this theory of these bubbles in time-space opening up and really creating a conduit for all kinds of manifestations.
Yeah, we were talking about Jesus feeding the 5,000 with the same loaves and fishes.
Yes.
And essentially what my model says how this could be is that there's a body of information that represents those loaves and fishes, that all they would need to do is be materialized in thousands of different places at the exact same coordinate and time. So what you actually have is a descriptive model of bilocation. The interesting thing about this model is that it doesn't violate the conservation laws that say matter and energy can neither be created nor destroyed, because the 5,000 loaves and fishes are the exact same loaves and fishes. Nothing new is being created, so it doesn't violate the laws of conservation.
Now, you say this theory is provable. How would that be in simple terms?
Well, there's a lot of different predictions that it makes about reality on the whole. But if we go back to that window of paranormal phenomena, we would find a number of things that this would predict. If this is actually due to this bending of space and materializing of information. Number one, we would detect a barometric pressure difference between the one surface and the other surface of the bubble. Second thing that we would detect a distortion in gravity. We would actually detect a gravitational field on 3 axes, not just a displacement of the single-dimensional gravitational field that's pointing down to the center of the Earth. Since space and time is linked, if we bend space, we're also going to bend time. So we're going to be able to detect time distortions, time compression, and time dilation. Another thing that it would predict is that since EVPs are an electromagnetic function, it would predict, number one, that EVPs could be recorded inside of a vacuum. Number two, it would predict that EVPs could be recorded on a recorder with the diaphragm of the microphone having been physically removed. And another thing that it would predict is that we would be able to coordinate all these particular phenomena at the exact same moment. There's a gentleman who's done a lot of experimentation on this, David Roundtree. He was a host or a guest at Coast to Coast back in November. It was exciting to discover that he has already experimentally validated all of these things that I've talked about. This is absolutely unprecedented. This goes beyond any philosophical or metaphysical or ecclesiastical theory. This has actually become a scientific roadmap by which we can actually prove scientifically the function of paranormal events.
Well, people who have been following the paranormal field as long as I have and been listening, they'll remember that the trend is that these different things happen in the same place, like the Skinwalker Ranch. Many years ago, that was bought. They bought this because they saw this UFO activity, and they were surprised when they put up all these cameras to discover that there were ghosts and poltergeists and orbs and all kinds of things. And if you talk to experiencers who lived in haunted houses, they too will tell you oftentimes that they saw UFOs and other things, and now UFOs are linked with Bigfoot. So it seems to go in the direction that a phenomenon of any sort can manifest, and if there is something happening in a particular place, then anything can happen.
Well, certainly there has to be a reason why certain places are haunted and certain places aren't.
Okay.
We know, based on this model, everything is like an Einsteinian continuum. One part of reality flows into the next part, and this superphysical information is the same way. And so the information about that location and the information about entities or souls, let's say, that had lived in it previously are still entangled. These sites are very often associated with strong emotional trauma. And we've already talked about the idea that the human brain has the ability to directly affect the materialization of physical reality. My theory is that these instances of strong emotion actually weaken the fabric of space-time in those areas. It actually damages them. So it's like a fatigued piece of metal that becomes weakened and can be more easily manipulated. And that, coupled with the information, the coherent intelligences that are connected in the continuum of information with that place, creates what we would call a haunted house.
It's creating like a weak point or a more porous point in the time-space fabric of that particular location.
It's exactly like an old inner tube to a tire that gets a weak spot. You fill it with air and you get a bubble.
And if you're some sort of extra-dimensional entity and you want to cross into this realm, you'd go for the place that's easier to cross over.
Absolutely. That's the way paranormal phenomenon naturally occurs. And I say that, again, if UFOs are intelligently contrived spacecraft, that they have figured out a way to do this intentionally, artificially.
Yeah. Let me jump into the phone calls. First-time caller line, Colorado Springs. Rhonda, welcome to Coast to Coast.
Hi.
Hi. What's your question?
Let's see. In the summer of 9/11, we don't know exactly when, I was just sitting and my clock died, so I went to change the batteries, put the batteries in, and time started going backwards, and the clock has been going backwards since then.
What do you make of that, Thomas?
Well, that's very interesting. If there is a direct effect to a bubble of space-time surrounding that particular clock, it could cause it to run backward. But to be in all truthfulness, it's very difficult to qualify this unless we actually had the clock to inspect.
Yeah. Has anything else strange happened, Rhonda?
No, everything just felt very odd, and there's been another event in the exact same area. I was driving, this was just a couple of years ago, driving through there, and I just felt like I was in the wrong place.
Okay.
Literally. Things didn't look right, and then, so maybe that's one of the hot spots he's speaking of.
Yeah, no, could very well be. Well, Thomas, this is something that really starts to fuel the imagination here, because we do know that there are areas of the world, like the Bermuda Triangle, that have had countless things happen, and things of a different variety. We know places are hotspots. And is it also true that intelligence from outside a dimension could just choose anywhere to pop in? In other words, if they had a craft, could they use these little bubbles to get their craft here, zip around and zip out, so that these things can happen literally anywhere as well?
Well, that's the whole idea, Rob, with this model. We know from the physical side of our universe that when a mass is accelerated towards the speed of light, it starts approaching what we call infinity. We know that space and time, as we approach the speed of light, begin to collapse in on themselves. If we were to cross over that barrier, space and time would collapse into what we would call a singularity, so that, let's say, a distant solar system on another arm of our galaxy superphysically would be no more further from us than, let's say, the town next door. And if they could collapse the space-time bubble around their craft and have a coordinate that they could drop it back into where we are, their craft and they themselves would rematerialize with all their information intact, and they could literally jump across great expanses of space without needing things like wormholes or supercomputers to disassemble and reassemble matter. It's an actual natural part of the universe that they've learned to exploit.
Yeah, and this is what we know about the nature of gravity. Whenever there's an intense gravitational force, or even twisted gravity like wormholes or black holes, you get time disturbances. So it seems to go along with what you're talking about. From Connecticut, West Hartford. Bill, welcome to Coast AM.
Yes, hi, Rob. Hi, this is Bill in West Hartford, Connecticut. It's my first time talking to you personally. Hi.
Hi.
Thomas, let me say first, I'm a scientific-minded person. I'm an amateur astronomer, and I'm an atheist myself. So I just want to say first that the Bible is not a science book, so I wouldn't take literally what is written in the Bible as evidence for things, because I think there were things that are obviously written thousands of years ago. We can't question the people who wrote the Bible and ask them and find out. But to get to now, to 2012, my two questions, A and B, and I'll ask them together. A, if the LHC in Geneva, Switzerland, the Large Hadron Collider, which is looking at the subatomic particle range, which has the ability to detect other dimensions, my question A is, if it should prove other dimensions other than the three dimensions of space and one of time, as well as B, if the European Space Agency Planck, that is looking at the leftover microwave radiation from the Big Bang in high definition, that will come out with its all-sky data in less than a year, January of next year, and it should show that there are other universes that have bumped into our early universe during the first 300,000 years of its existence, because there could be imprints of other universes bumping into our universe. Would those two things, if they are proved, other dimensions by the Large Hadron Collider and other universes by that space probe, unmanned space probe Planck, how would that relate to what you're talking about?
Well, Bill, what I would say is this idea of multiverses, when you really start breaking it down and looking at it very critically, and I'm actually working on a book that will be published sometime this summer called The Multiverse Conspiracy, we find that it really breaks down. There's no coherence to it, and there's no testable predictions that it actually makes that makes any sense to the basic theory of multiple universes. So what I would answer that, and I'll put myself on a limb right now, my theory predicts that they will not find evidence for multiple universes. And we'll wait till that time, and we'll see who's right.
All right, you heard it here. Mark the date and time. Let's go to Raleigh, North Carolina, the wild card line. Chris, welcome to Coast AM.
Hey, thank you. My wife and I experienced something about 6 years ago, where the easiest way to explain what we saw is like the old TV, the horizontal line on our old TVs that you could see things move. We had something go through our room at a 45-degree angle from the top right bottom left. It was pale green, and it passed through our room. And my wife and I are both trained as psychologists, so we're educated, and we know not to that our minds can play tricks on us when we see things. And it passed about 8:45 in the evening. It could not have been car lights, and it did make the TV flicker, but it was pale green, just like a horizontal bar on a TV. Back when I was a kid, when we make everything kind of move sideways. And the strange thing about it was, my wife and I, who are gabbers, didn't talk for about 15 minutes. And then I looked at the clock, just something's weird, just to see if maybe, we lost time or something. And no, we hadn't lost any time. I said to my wife, I said, did you see something? And she said, yes, something passed through. And then we went on, because we're psychologists and, don't ask leading questions. We asked each other questions. We saw the same thing and described the same thing. And I've never found anything that has ever described what we experienced. I was just wondering if maybe your guest today might have an idea.
Well, do you think what he was talking about seems like perhaps a viable possibility?
Well, absolutely. And one of the keys to what you're describing that connects it with this model of the paranormal is the idea that it affected the functioning of the TV. This is normally associated not only with haunting sites, but also with close proximity of UFOs. And so this is being a result of the bending of space and the production of an electromagnetic field around it, that at certain frequencies and amplitudes, it will definitely interfere with electrical equipment. As far as the shape of it and the color of it, that's going to have to do with the materialization or the information that's materializing within it. So we're not familiar with all the information that would be available to the universe, but certainly the way it behaved is very consistent with this model.
There's just so many different phenomena, Thomas, that comes to mind to ask you about. I mean, that UFO that shut down that missile silo. Here's one entity using perhaps the same technology to interfere with other electronics. My good friend Conrad down in Carlsbad told me about a friend of his that saw this luminous orb come off the beach and move right past them. I mean, we hear this over and over and over again. And what is it in your mind that is the strongest possibility for a well-known phenomenon that fits the model of your theory?
Well, gravity certainly would be one of them. It's difficult to pick one out that would be the most clearest example. I think gravity would be one. It answers all the mysteries surrounding gravity. Paranormal phenomena would certainly be another. And once we have this model that I talked about the way that an orb, a luminous orb, is actually constructed physically, it makes perfect sense how these things would appear and exactly how they would behave.
Yep. Well, let's get some more examples. Let's go back to the phones. They are blowing up from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Peter, welcome to Coast AM.
How are you? You ready for this?
Go for it.
I am.
Why couldn't gravity be the God particle? Because it provides meaning, and it's holding everything in your room in place. And it could be said that it's literally the will of God that there be order.
I understand what you're saying, and absolutely, if we see gravity as a function of the bending of space, and the bending of space is occurring from outside of space-time, as Theodore Kaluza concluded, and if we further understand that the universe itself reflects a greater intelligence, then certainly we could take that philosophical concept and expand it into my theory and give it some scientific foundation.
Good question. Let's keep going here. Let's jump over to Tallahassee, Florida, east of the Rockies. Moses, welcome to Coast AM.
Yes, good morning. How you doing, Rod?
Good morning.
How you doing, Thomas?
Hi.
Yes, that analogy you made about the 5 loaves, and the 2 fishes, from my revelation, that was an analogy about the loaves being the word, bread or the word or the knowledge, and he was teaching the science of the zodiac sign Pisces. He had so much more information that the people could have taken it basket full. Again, and Melchizedek, king of Salem, the one who was reported to have no mother, no father, no beginning, no ending.
You're talking about Melchizedek.
Right. But if you spell it M-E-L, it's short for melanated, which means dark, black or very dark, and chi, C-H-I, chi energy, force. Again, it's male chi and dark energy and consciousness associated with it.
Some sort of maybe allegory to the dark matter in the universe. Well, we'll have to get your response to that, Moses, on the other side of the break. We're just coming up to it. We're talking with Thomas P. Fusco. His book is called Behind the Cosmic Veil. You're listening to Coast AM. Stay tuned. More to come and more phone calls. Yes, this is Coast to Coast AM, and we're talking to Thomas P. Fusco about his book called Behind the Cosmic Veil. And he's talking about how a lot of paranormal phenomenon, even religious, supernatural, can be explained by these bubbles in space-time opening up. And that really just is pure potential. And with certain control or organization behind it, it can explain away all the things that we've been scratching our heads about for years. And with the advancement of physics, it's actually starting to make sense. Now, of course, I have to ask him when we come back about the pyramids and these megalithic structures, and if these bubbles, these little portals, can be used to build things too. And your questions as well. Now, when I do Coast, I know I just get hundreds of emails from people saying, hey, where can I hear this show and where can I hear that show? And just to let everyone know, in one fell swoop, you got to become a Coast Insider. Just go there. If you sign up for a year, it's 15 cents a day, and you literally have access to all these shows. It's enormous. You can download them, listen to while you're driving, and you can just go through them all and pick and choose whatever ones you want. It is amazing. Now, that service is easy to get information about, as well as Tom's Fusco's book and his website. It's all up at coasttocoastam.com. We're back. And Thomas, what about the idea that these sort of bubbles, these little portals that open up and create all this potential, can they be used to build things, all these great monuments that we've seen throughout the ages?
Well, I think that it can explain some of the things that, some of the mysteries that we've observed with all this. What I want to do, though, Rob, real quick, if I could, is just take a moment to expand on something that one of the other callers earlier talked about. You
mean about Melchizedek?
Well, no, not quite that, although I'd comment on that, too. I wanted to let the folks understand why atheism is so hinged on this idea of multiple universes, so that people understand the underlying philosophy behind this. We, as I've said, we've gone to a place in our sciences where we have increasingly found that we don't have the material, the physical material, to explain everything that we observe. And this is becoming, like you observed earlier, frighteningly close for them to coming up to a recognition of what we would call a spiritual realm. So they are desperate to prove this multiverse idea, because those other universes will provide material to explain all these supernatural things. So for an apparition, that's material coming from another universe. Disembodied voice, that's somebody communicating with you from another universe. And by this, they hope to destroy anything that's spiritual or has to do with the concept of God by just making up new material to fill in the blanks, so to speak.
Well, getting back to the idea that gravity is really the integral part of this, correct me if I'm wrong, the thing about gravity and why it's considered a very weak force considered to electromagnetism is that some of the potential of gravity slips off into a different dimension. Isn't that one of the sort of cornerstones to trying to understand why gravity is, in fact, one of the weakest forces?
Well, it's interesting that we talk about a weak force with gravity, and yet at the same time, physics claims that gravity was the main force that had caused order in the early chaotic universe and started pulling all the different elements together to form galaxies and star systems, that type of thing. So I'm not in total agreement with the idea that it is a quote unquote weak force.
Can it slip into different dimensions? Do you think? Do you think that it has an ability to cross over?
Well, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that gravity is purely a physical effect, which is caused by the bending of space. It's the bending of space which is resulting in my model from a source outside of the physical universe. So in a sense, you might say that gravity doesn't bleed out of our universe. It sort of kind of bleeds into it.
And it seems to me if something is capable of bending time-space, this fabric, it's kind of like a piece of paper. You can bend and fold a piece of paper into just about anything.
Absolutely. If you take a rubber membrane and you try to compare it, let's say, to the fabric of space-time, and it was stretched out, and you'd put a baseball on it, and it would bend the space around it, sink into the rubber, so to speak. And, of course, if you moved it across the rubber with your hand, that would be normal movement. But if you went behind the rubber where we can't see and pulled on it in front of the baseball would magically roll forward all by of itself with no visible means of propulsion. Mm-hmm. And so when we can manipulate the fabric of space, we can work basically all kinds of miracles that we could ever imagine.
Okay. Well, the phones are ringing off the hook. Let's go back. Let's go to Detroit, Michigan. Let's talk to Claudia. Claudia, welcome to Coast AM.
Well, I'm not a physicist. I'm just a lowly social worker, so a lot of this has been over my head. But I was wondering about precognition. I have frequently had experience with precognition. I came home from work one day and the house smelled very strongly of flowers. And are you there?
Yeah, we're listening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I was a newlywed, and I thought, wow, my husband got me flowers. I walked out, no flowers, overwhelming smell. And it dissipated, and that was Friday night. Sunday, my grandmother died suddenly of esophageal hemorrhage. And when I got to the funeral home on Tuesday, that it was the exact smell of the flowers, the overwhelming smell of the flowers in a funeral home. And I was just wondering how precognition fits into all of this.
That's a good question. I mean, what about, the psychic component to this? How does that work, Thomas?
Well, thought is also a coherent collection of information. And so, for example, in telepathy, let's say, for example, we know that thought has a physical component. It has an electrochemical component that can be measured and observed. But it also has an informational component that we cannot see and measure. So in telepathy, when that thought travels outside of space-time and enters into brain B, for example, we don't have an electrochemical teleportation from A to B. It's just the information. But when that information trickles down into brain B, the electrochemical component of it immediately materializes in our mind according to the order of that information. Now, if we think about space and time and this information, kind of like a bicycle wheel, let's say our space-time is like the hub, or not the hub, the rim. And these spokes extend from the rim to a center point. And let's call that center point, that hub, a singularity, where space-time and information is collapsed in on itself. Well, the information, so to speak, that would materialize in that odor, that aroma of flowers, could come down on any one of those spokes at a different point in physical reality and materialize itself. So this is how we would have precognition, where information that would actually comprise the event in the future would come down in the present, so to speak, because it's coming from the same source, but in a place where time has collapsed in on itself.
Okay, well, let's keep going. Let's go to Tennessee. Chris, first-time caller line. Welcome to Coast to Coast AM.
Hi, good evening, Rob. I think you're doing a great job.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Thomas, you're a fantastic guest, and the information that you're covering is literally mind-blowing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I've studied Buddhism, and I've also studied Christ's teachings extensively. I'm 38 years old. But I've also merged that somehow with science and physics and sacred geometry and the Fibonacci sequence. I'm fascinated with the nature of reality. Excuse me. Also, the nature of matter. We're made of millions and millions of swirling atoms. Everything around us is constantly in motion, and yet it appears to us that everything is solid. But we know it's not. And to me, this is what I've always thought. This is how Christ was able to do his miracles. And you touched on that. And I just wanted you to expand on that. Maybe somehow, just like Christ or the Buddha or many others maybe that we don't even know about, have somehow been able to train their minds to literally control their reality and the matter around them in ways that we don't understand. And yet, as you mentioned, we are now learning about. And I just wanted you to expand upon that.
Good question.
Yeah, sure. Again, in fact, when you talk about this divine order, this geometry, so to speak, this actually relates to the Medieval deck question.
Okay, good. I'm glad we came back to that.
Yeah, where there is a collection of, how you would say, building blocks of reality that have a particular shape and form in the superphysical. From the biblical point of view, for example, God spoke one of those collections of basic forms into the word light, and then light came into existence based on the shape of those forms that were spoken by him. As far as these particular individuals being able to do this, yes, they've had an ability to be able to tap in to this particular collection of information, as we all have on some level, and was able to manipulate it. Of course, myself being a Christian, my belief is that Jesus Christ actually had a direct pipeline to this. And so he was able to work these kinds of miracles because he was actually, part of him was always acting in that other realm. This is what he meant when he said, I do nothing of myself. I only see what my Father's doing, and I do the same. So in his mind's eye, he was actually manipulating the source of matter, and we ourselves standing around as observers only saw the effect, and so we saw a miracle.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things in the Bible, of course. Moses throwing down his staff and turning into a snake, and the burning bush. I mean, so many different things. Are you of the mindset that some of these were observable examples of your theory at work?
Well, absolutely. All of these things, if one is to believe the reports in the Bible, all of these things were observable effects, and therefore they had to have some sort of a cause, and the causes were not locally, physically connected to the effect. And so everything in the universe is a result of materialized information. So consequently, these various different observations were a materialization of information coming from outside of space-time.
Okay, a lot of questions. People are calling in. They want to share their thoughts. Let's go west of the Rockies. Richard, Redding, California. Welcome to Coast AM.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, what do I got going? I had Anthony Sanchez here the other day with, he wrote the book UFO Highways and Paranormal Pals, a lady with him interviewing me. And like you speak about gravity, I just went to make a cup of coffee. Now it's back on again, like gravity boots. I just have my shoes on, and something keeps in my home goofing with me, or and there's knocks on the wall, there's clicks. The TV, I can shut it off, it'll click, click. I have about 7 witnesses. I can't. I'm warm all the time, super warm. It's raining here in Reading, and I will leave the door open all night and sleep without blankets, and I'm kept super warm. And I had a bunch of abscesses in the bottom of my feet overnight. Then the doctor just gave me antibiotics. But I think something went in my feet, and I had something in my groin area too. And I think something was put in there. But anyway, I can't get this to stop.
So you think there's something going on there? How long has it been going on for, Richard?
Going on 10 years. It's been getting stronger.
Wow.
Where now if I go shopping, I can't stay long. It's like, I get an hour to shop, and all of a sudden they'll do my feet. They'll make it where I can't walk good. I'll have to come home. As soon as I get home, it gets released. I don't know if it's under mind control. I don't know if it's under extraterrestrial. I don't know if it's under some type of demonic or something like that.
Yeah.
Can't figure out which one it belongs to, but it's happening definitely every day, every night, and it's ruined my life. It's not fun. It's more or less hurtful, and sometimes it feels like they're removing fluids from me. I get little pinholes.
He's got a lot of phenomena. I mean, Thomas, what do you think? Any thoughts?
Well, absolutely. A lot of what you're talking about would be the result of the superphysical bending of space. We still don't fully understand all the effects that would have on a physical body. We see some of them at the sites of hauntings. But, for example, if one of these bubbles opened up very quickly in the presence of, let's say, building material, you would hear those knockings, those rappings. If you had these occurring in your body in a severe way, it would certainly cause damage to you. It sounds like you've got some situations going with a damaged fabric of space-time that's surrounding you or in your environment.
Well, what can people do if they have these things and they don't want them? Is there any way to push them off and shoo them away or get rid of them?
Well, it's a difficult thing to say. Psychics may have their own answers and what they try to do with that, and like exorcists have another example. But what our problem is that we would have to study this case in great detail to find out what intelligence is actually causing this. Because of this poor individual, what he's going through, it might actually be his own intelligence that's doing this, and it's just he naturally has this ability, but isn't aware of it, doesn't know how to control it, and it's running amok on him. And I wish there was some way that we could help him with that.
You're working on a new book, Richard, Thomas?
Yes, I'm working on a book called The Multiverse Conspiracy and Other Plots by Modern Physics to Destroy All Things Spiritual. And it's going to talk about all the different fallacies of the multiverse and why the model is inconsistent with itself, and basically from the evidence that this is supposed to explain how it cannot be the solution to supernatural or paranormal phenomena.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. You've opened up sort of a whole window of discussion, and we're going to continue taking phone calls from people who are going to talk about their own experiences. Your book is called Behind the Cosmic Veil, and if people want it, they can go to www.cosmicveil.com, and I'm sure they'll be interested in taking a look. The first chapter is up there for people who want to read it. And Thomas, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks very much for having me. I really appreciate it, and it was a great time.
I absolutely appreciate it as well. As I say, we're going to continue this dialogue, open lines for the rest of the show. And, there is a order to some of these things. So you can start to see a pattern, a linking to phenomenon that before this kind of discussion was seemingly unrelated. So that's coming up next hour. You're listening to Coast AM. My name is Rob Simone, and we'll dive deeper down the rabbit hole when we come back. Yes, welcome back to Coast AM. And what can I say? My mind's still reeling. Now, is the idea that there is a phenomenon or a mechanism at place that can explain all the things that are mysterious in the world? Well, I don't know, but I do know this. I know that science is growing by leaps and bounds, and there's no stopping it. And can you imagine a world 1,000 years from now that still has a church and a religion? Or does the idea of holding on to the beliefs from 2,000 years ago